Mr. Cain, you supported Steve Forbes in 2000.
Yes.
Flat tax proponent.
Yes.
Now you're a champion of the FairTax.
Yes.
Can you talk to me a little bit about your evolution on tax cuts and how you think about taxes?
Sure. I supported Steve Forbes because he made the flat tax on income one of his primary platform items. And I have been of the opinion for decades, anything is better than what we have today. So if Steve had a chance of becoming president and he had a chance to promote the flat tax on income, I was going to help him promote it because it's still 200% better than what we have today. Steve didn't get the nomination. Steve didn't become president. The flat tax movement essentially died when Steve, stopped running for office. I can remember back in the early 90s when Representative Dick Armey from Texas was a big supporter of the flat tax. So at one point during the decade of the 90s, the flat tax was serious legislation. It had some co-sponsors, but it never really took off. And so I supported Steve, number one, because he was a businessman, successful one. Number two, a successful businessman understands the free market system. And number three, because of the flat tax. After Steve did not succeed, the fair tax had been introduced in Congress in 1999 by Representative John Linder out of Georgia. I had studied the flat tax and the fair tax throughout the 90s and when I was on the commission. And I've always been of the opinion I could live with either one of them if we could get one of them passed to replace the mess we have today. And so now, the latter part, in 1999 going forward during the decade of the 2000s, the flat tax had the momentum. It had actual legislation. And they were getting co-sponsors, and the fair tax had momentum. The fair tax had legislation. The fair tax movement was starting to build out amongst the grassroots. And so, yes, I raised my hand and said, I can get on this bandwagon too. Because it's not an either or in terms of improving what we have. And so because there was more momentum, that was a grassroots movement, I then said, yeah, I can support the fair tax. And if you look at it purely theoretical versus practical, the fair tax, in my opinion, is the better option of the two for the following big reason. The flat tax would have still been a flat tax on income set by the government. The fair tax is a single rate tax on consumption set by the consumer. That's why theoretically I prefer the fair tax. But if the flat tax had gotten legs, I would have been happy with that too.